Smoke and fear. The old barn stood at the edge of a dying town called Mason Creek, its wooden walls weathered, its roof patched with rusted tin. Inside that barn, a man named Eli Turner stood guard. His face was carved by the years, his eyes gray as the ash that clung to his worn coat. He had once been known as an outlaw, a name that carried weight and warning in the towns along the frontier. But that night, Eli Turner was something else entirely. He was a man standing between the helpless and the storm. 200 women huddled inside, their breaths shallow, their whispers trembling. Some were young, some old, some carrying infants wrapped in rags. All of them had fled from a raid led by the same men who once rode with Eli. Men who had turned to savagery when law and mercy had failed. Eli had seen too much blood in his life, too much cruelty hiding behind orders and badges. When he found those women hiding in the ashes of their burned settlement, he did not think. He simply acted. He led them to his barn, the only place left with strong walls and a roof to hide beneath. All night he moved between the shadows, hauling water from the well, tearing old sheets into bandages, whispering comfort to those who sobbed in the dark. The barn smelled of hay and sweat and desperation. Lanterns flickered against the beams, casting long trembling shadows. Some of the women recognized him. They had heard the name Eli Turner before, the train robber, the gunman, the man who once shot a sheriff in the leg and rode off laughing. But that was years ago. Now his laughter had died, and in its place was a silence filled with regret. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he only asked that they stay quiet and trust him until dawn. The hours crawled by, the youngest among them clung to one another, their small bodies shaking with cold. Eli's horse, Dust, stomped nervously in the adjoining stall, sensing the tension that filled the air. Outside, the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the wind carried faint echoes of riders. Eli knew what that meant. The sheriff and his men were coming. Sheriff Weller was not a cruel man, but he was bound by law, and law had no room for mercy in times like these. The town had been told that Eli Turner was hiding fugitives, bandits, they said, women who had helped rebels raid a convoy. In truth, they were victims. But truth had a way of dying quietly when fear spoke louder. As the night deepened, Eli sat on a wooden crate near the barn door, a rifle resting across his knees. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing what awaited him at sunrise. He had written a note hours earlier, folded neatly in his pocket, addressed to the sheriff. It was short. It said only, "Don't shoot the innocent." He didn't expect it to save him, but he hoped it might save them. A woman named Clara approached him, her face pale, her eyes haunted. She had been a teacher before the raids, before her school was burned and her husband taken. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Eli looked at her, his jaw tightening. "Because no one else will," he said quietly. "And because I owe this land a debt." She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. She could see it in the lines of his face, the years of running, of killing, of surviving. He had been a man who took from others. Now, for once, he was giving everything he had left. The first light of dawn bled into the sky, soft and gray. Eli could see the dust rising in the distance, riders approaching, slow and deliberate. Sheriff Weller's men. The sound of hooves was steady, certain, like a drumbeat of judgment. The women stirred, panic spreading through the barn like wildfire. Eli stood and motioned for silence. "Stay down," he said firmly. "No noise, no light." He walked to the door, his boots sinking into the dirt. The rifle felt heavy in his hands, but his heart was steady. He opened the barn door just enough to see the horizon. There they were, 6 riders, their badges glinting faintly in the new light. Eli stepped out into the open, his shadow stretching long across the frosted grass. The sheriff raised a hand for his men to halt. "Turner," Weller called, his voice carrying across the cold morning. "You know why I'm here." Eli nodded slowly. "I reckon I do." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You've got fugitives in there. 200 of them, if the reports are true." Eli's lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "Not fugitives," he said. "Refugees. They didn't start this war. They just got caught in it." Weller shifted in his saddle. "Doesn't matter. Orders are orders. The army wants them. I can't let you keep them." Eli glanced back at the barn. Through the cracks in the wood, he could see faces, eyes watching, wide and terrified. He turned back to Weller. "Then you'll have to take them over my dead body." The sheriff sighed. "You don't have to do this, Eli. You've done enough wrong in your life. Don't add this to it." Eli's voice was low, calm, almost sorrowful. I've done plenty wrong, Sheriff. Maybe this'll even the scales a little. The two men stood in silence, the wind tugging at their coats. The other riders shifted nervously, hands hovering near their holsters. Weller dismounted, stepping closer. You're outnumbered, Turner. Eli met his eyes. Always have been. A long moment passed. Then the sheriff nodded slightly, almost in respect. You give them up, I'll make sure you get a fair trial. Eli chuckled softly, shaking his head. Fair trial, Sheriff, you and I both know men like me don't get those. He took a deep breath, his gaze turning toward the rising sun. Tell you what, though. Let me talk to them one last time. Then I'll come quietly. Weller hesitated. There was something in Eli's tone, an exhaustion that was almost holy. You've got 5 minutes, he said finally. Eli turned and walked back to the barn. Inside, every pair of eyes was on him. They're here, he said simply. But you're not gonna be harmed. When I step out there again, you stay inside. Don't make a sound. Sheriff Weller's a decent man. He won't fire on women and children. He looked around, meeting each frightened face. Whatever happens next, you remember this, you were worth saving. Clara stepped forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. You can't just go out there and die for us, she whispered. Eli smiled faintly. I'm not dying for you, he said. I'm living right for once. She tried to speak, but no words came. He placed a hand on her shoulder, then turned and stepped back into the morning light. The sheriff watched as Eli emerged, his rifle hanging loosely in one hand. They're staying, Eli said quietly. If you want me, I'm yours. Weller's men raised their weapons, uncertain. Don't, the sheriff ordered. He walked closer, studying Eli's face. You really think this makes you a hero? Eli shook his head. No, just a man who finally did one thing that mattered. The sheriff's jaw tightened. You know I can't just let them go. Eli looked at him, his voice steady. Then take me. Tell your superiors the outlaw died resisting arrest. That'll satisfy them. The sheriff's eyes flickered with something like pity. You'd trust me with that? Eli smiled sadly. You're still a better man than I ever was. The two men stood face to face, the silence stretching between them like a bridge over years of blood and regret. Then Weller gave a slow nod. All right, he said. Mount up, I'll take you in. Eli turned, giving one last look toward the barn. The morning sun caught the edge of the roof, lighting it in gold. Inside, the women waited, breathless. He wanted to tell them not to cry, not to be afraid, but the words stuck in his throat. He simply lifted a hand in farewell. Then he mounted Dust and rode beside the sheriff. They rode in silence for a mile before Weller spoke. They'll come looking for them again, you know. Eli nodded. Then you'll tell them you found the barn empty. That the outlaw burned it down with all inside. They'll stop looking after that. The sheriff glanced at him. You'd take that blame. Eli smiled faintly. I've taken worse. By the time they reached town, the sun was high and the people had gathered to see the infamous Eli Turner brought in. Whispers ran through the crowd, some cursing, some pitying. Eli dismounted slowly, his wrists bound. He didn't resist. The sheriff led him into the jailhouse and locked the door behind him. For a moment, they stood there, two men caught in a tangle of duty and redemption. You'll hang for this, Weller said softly. I know, Eli replied. But they'll live. That night, as he sat in the dim light of his cell, Eli could hear the wind outside carrying the faint sound of church bells from a distant town. He closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. In the morning, they would come for him. But he was not afraid. For the first time in years, his heart was light. He had done something good. At dawn, the sheriff came to the cell, holding a folded piece of paper. A rider came in early, he said quietly. Said the women made it north. Safe. Eli smiled, a single tear slipping down his weathered cheek. Good, he whispered. That's good. Weller hesitated, then handed him the paper. It's from Clara. Eli unfolded it with trembling hands. The note was short. Because of you, we live. You are forgiven. Hours later, the town gathered in silence as the sun rose high. Eli Turner was led to the gallows, his head held high. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked toward the horizon, where the light broke through the clouds. He felt no fear, only peace. When the lever dropped, a wind swept through Mason Creek, scattering dust across the streets. The sheriff stood still for a long time, his hat in his hands. Later that evening, he rode back to the barn. It was empty now, silent except for the creak of old wood and the smell of hay. On one beam, he found a carving, E.T., and beneath it, 2 words, they lived. Years passed. The story of Eli Turner spread across the frontier. Some called him a fool, others a saint. But the women who had survived never forgot the man who had stood between them and death. They built a small chapel near the northern border, its bell cast from melted bullets. On its walls hung a single plaque, for the outlaw who chose mercy. And long after the wind had erased his footprints from the dirt, his act remained, a whisper carried across generations, a reminder that even the worst of men could rise to do the noblest of things. Because sometimes, the bravest stand a man can make is not with a gun, but with his heart.